Up a man, this ain't murder three. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike.shop. Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. As usual, I'm running into some bizarre technical difficulty with the computer that I use to record the show. This is my second go at it today. Hopefully, this time it will work. Last week, I don't know what happened. Also, some technical difficulty. The video was nothing but a green screen, which was odd because I went back and I checked the video and it was perfectly fine at my end, but when I sent it to YouTube, the image disappeared. All it had was just the background or the green screen, so I had to resubmit the video. Hopefully, this time we won't have too many difficulties. Seeing as my engineer, my producer, my recordists, my editor, well, they're all me. So, tonight's show is about extrasensory perception, better known as ESP. It's a paranormal phenomenon in which people receive information about or exert control over their environment in ways that don't use the five senses. Some call this the sixth sense or precognition. For reasons I don't understand, things like psychokinesis, the ability to move objects without physical contact, gets lumped in with ESP. It's not a sense, it's an ability, but, well, ESP violates our understanding of basic scientific principles. Still, estimates suggest that about 2/3 of the people here in the United States believe that ESP is possible. Even in academia, ESP has inspired serious scientific debate. Some psychologists suggest that the subject deserves consideration. Skeptics, of course, point out that the evidence is weak at best. Skeptics don't even believe what they see with their own eyes, so something wrong with those folks. Scientists insist that if it can't be recreated in the lab, it's not real. I guess that means that gravity isn't real. There are lots of papers out there trying to explain gravity, but all it is just we think and therefore it is kind of thing. Kind of like the theory of evolution. Theory, not fact. But, well, anyway, that's science for you. That's why I always make fun of the boys in the white lab coats. Fascination with ESP is rooted in the spiritualist movement of the 19th century Britain and the United States. Members of the fashionable elite, those are the guys who didn't have to work for a living, would hold seances in which mediums would attempt to communicate with the spirits. As the Civil War was winding down, people with sons and husbands off fighting wanted to know if their family members were still alive. This led to a lot of fake psychics showing up charging money to tell folks that yes, their loved one was fine and he was on his way home. Days later, months, years, their loved one would not show up because he was dead, but the fakes were making a killing at it, literally. A quick way to determine if a psychic is valid or not is how much they want to charge for their services. Real psychics might charge just enough money to keep the lights on, a couple of bucks, or they might ask for a donation, a contribution, something so they can eat. Now, they're not going to charge you an arm and a leg to tell you anything. By the end of the 19th century, scientists and other researchers were joining societies devoted to studying not only communication with spirits, but the whole psychic phenomenon. 1882, the Society of Psychical Research emerged in London, and in 1885, people funded a corresponding society here in the United States. The term extrasensory perception was not widely used until the 1930s when Duke University psychologist J.B. Rhine opened a lab devoted to studying the sixth sense. Before that, people called it second sight or spirit sight and sometimes visions. Rhine became famous for his work with the Zener cards, each of which was marked with one of five symbols. He would flip through the deck containing 25 of these cards and have participants identify the symbol on each without seeing the card itself. Theoretically, the average person should get 1 out of 5 correct, or 20%, just by guessing. Rhine found that some people consistently identified the correct card more than 20% of the time. Rhine's research, which he published in Extrasensory Perception, 1934 book, generated both some really good fascination as well as a lot of criticism. One review of the book, published that same year in the journal Nature, insinuated that Rhine's belief in ESP might have biased his results. Rhine's research also fueled the growth of a new field of parapsychology. In 1957, he formed the Parapsychological Association, which was devoted to the study of psychic experiences. The term parapsychology was coined in 1889 by philosopher Max Dossier from Germany. It was adopted by Rhine in the 1930s as a replacement for the term psychical research in order to indicate a significant shift towards scientific experimentation and methodology. Para is for alongside, and psychology is the study of the human mind and how it works. Since parapsychology took off, some scientists devoted their careers to investigating the existence of ESP. Between 1972 and 1995, the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency spent $20 million on ESP related research. Now, most of it was done at the Stanford Research Institute. According to a 2015 article published in the Sage Open Journal, the program was nicknamed Stargate, and it was devoted to ESP applications in the Cold War. Today, ESP research appears alongside normal psychology research in high-profile peer-reviewed journals, including American Psychologist and the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. Any of my listeners out there read either of those? I didn't think so. Many of the studies appear to provide evidence of the existence of ESP. In the 1970s, researchers began conducting Gansfield experiments in which participants would sit in a dark room with a blindfold on, listening to white noise. White noise is that staticky sound you get when you unplug the cable from your TV or the satellite dish falls off of the outside of the house. Researchers would ask the participants to focus on whatever images floated into their mind, while a sender sitting in another room viewed a target video clip or an image and attempted to transmit the information to the participant. Afterwards, the study participant would view a set of images, one of which was the target. If they selected the target image, it was considered a hit. Similar to the results of Rhine's earlier research, the results of dozens of these studies found that people consistently selected the target more often than one would expect based on chance. One of the best known and most controversial figures in ESP research is Daryl Bem, a professor of psychology at Cornell University. 2011, he published a paper in the journal Personality and Social Psychology that appeared to demonstrate evidence for precognition, or the ability to predict the future. He conducted 9 standard psychological experiments with well established psychological effects, but did them in reverse. He would show participants a long list of words and would have them memorize as many as possible, and then he would repeat what they remembered. Later, he would give them a subset of those words to practice by copying them out. Participants remembered more of the words they would later practice than those they didn't. In other words, it appeared that precognition helped participants remember words based on their future practice. How some of these scientists come up with these ideas for experiments, I have no idea, but every once in a while I get the urge to become a scientist, but then I'd have to say bad things about myself. In science, if you discover something and claim it as a fact, then other scientists following similar procedures should find the same thing. Something to consider. The folks doing most of the research use what's called a double blind study. A double blind study is one in which neither the participants nor the experimenters know what they're studying. This procedure is utilized to prevent bias in research results. If you're doing what they consider real science, and the results will be scientific. They do double blind studies because they believe knowing what they're studying will affect the outcome. Thinking about what you're doing will have an effect on the outcome. The mind of the researchers caused the experiment to go one way or the other. Now, doesn't that sound like psychic involvement? Just about everybody knows someone in their family who at one time predicted a coming event. Some even predicted more than one. The sinking of the Titanic was predicted in a book called The Wreck of the Titan by Morgan Robertson. This story follows a fictional ocean liner, Titan, which ultimately hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks. Like the Titanic, the Titan was described as the largest ship afloat at the time. The size and the length of the ship were quite close, as well as the speed at which they crashed into the icebergs. Both liners had a dangerous shortage of lifeboats. The Titan had been called the Unsinkable, and then it proceeded to sink in the middle of the night in April. When I write a fictional book, the story seems to write itself. I'm as amazed at where the story goes as my readers. On many occasions, I'll go back and read one of my books and wonder, where did that idea come from? So far, none of my fictional stories have come true. It would be a shock and a whole lot scary if one did, considering what I write about. Speaking of my books, if you haven't heard, I have another channel called Storytime with Chris James, where I read some of my humor stories from the past. Could Morgan Robertson have hooked into some form of precognitive vision leading to his writing the story about things to come? Because I believe the Titan was written 12 years before the Titanic was even dreamed up. Art Bell used to do a prediction show each year, December 29th, 30th, or 31st, depending on when the weekend would hit. Folks would call in and tell what they saw coming in the future. The predictions were to be based on either visions, dreams, or intuition. Folks would call and Art would make a note of what they saw coming in the following year. During the show, he would pull out the predictions from the year before and go over them. Those who said things would happen that never did, well, they would get a mention. Those who were correct would get a chance to call in once more to see if they could do it again. A man called in 2003 saying he saw a huge wave crashing ashore, killing thousands of people. Art said he hoped the caller was wrong, but the story was filed away for the coming year. A massive tsunami hit the Indian Ocean December 26th, 2004. The giant wall of water killed about 230,000 people in a dozen countries. They don't know how many people died because they never found all the bodies. Art called the man who made the prediction and asked if he had anything else on his mind. The caller tried, but that was it, one time. No more predictions after that. There's no way the caller could have predicted such an event other than through some psychic ability, even if it was only a one time deal. There's no way any scientist can explain this away. And the thing is, Art Bell had the guy's call recorded from the year before. I remember hearing it on the radio. So, since they can't explain it away, they simply ignore it. 2005, a caller said someone, kind of a young person from the Philippines, was about to have a huge impact on Art's life. The following year, Ramona died. Art went nuts. He quit the show and he didn't take care of himself very well. All of his friends were very worried about him. He was about as far gone as a person could get. One of his friends somehow managed to drag Art to the other side of the planet to try to get him outside of his own mind and hopefully find something that would reconnect him with the living. While in the Philippines, Art ran into Aaron. They fell in love and got married. The wedding was 2 years after the caller had made the prediction, but still, he was pretty darn close. Young person from the Philippines having an enormous impact on Art's life. Hmm. A woman told her story from May 25th, 2011. This was not on the Art Bell show. This was something else I read. She believed she'd had a second sight episode. She was being treated for cancer and she was having a very bad time of it. They had just gotten started. Her and her husband went for a walk to get some exercise and some fresh air. They stopped at the local bar to have a bit of a break or a rest, relax, have a few drinks. Her husband managed to get her seated at a table and then he went to get the drinks. While the woman sat there waiting, a man approached the table and asked if he could join them. This was a neighborhood bar and that kind of thing happened a lot. She pointed to the empty chair and the man sat down. He began to stare at her as if he was examining her. This kind of made her nervous. But then he said, "You have cancer and it's in your left breast." The only people that knew this was the doctor, her husband, and her. Yeah, well, she acknowledged the illness. And then the man said, "Don't worry. You're going to respond to the treatment and you're going to be okay." She'd only started the treatment a couple of days ago and there was no way to know how things were going to go. The man calmly looked her in the eye and said, "I am your guardian angel and I have come here today to let you know you're going to be fine. I know you don't believe me, but mark my words, everything I say will come true." With that, he got up and walked away. She never saw the man again. She explained it to her husband, but he hadn't seen the guy sitting there. She didn't think this was actually an angel. She thought that this was just some stranger who was having a ESP experience, and she was the subject of his vision. Perhaps he was clairvoyant. He knew what was going to come in the future. I have met other psychics that will do this. They'll see some stranger somewhere and they'll say, "I have to go talk to that person." And then they'll go tell them what it is that they've seen, and hopefully the recipient won't respond in a bad way. You never know in those situations. In TV shows and books, the psychic always sees way too many details, and they're able to solve cases with a great amount of flair and some action. It doesn't really work like that. Most of the time, the police look at psychics as if they're just ordinary folks with a need for attention. Either that or they're crazy. If a psychic gets too many details correct, then they become the prime suspect because the police believe there's no way in the world they can know these things unless they committed the crime. Most psychics don't see things quite as clearly as fictional characters. A dream of something that sticks in their mind, or maybe they'll have the same dream several times. They'll have a foggy vision of someone. It's unclear, but they'll see one or two tiny details that stick with them. Sometimes it's only these small details that, when examined, leads to a bigger clue that eventually puts the authorities on the right trail. Ashley Howley was 20 years old. The last time she was seen alive was June 16th, 2004. In the early hours, 911 received a call from Howley saying that her boyfriend, Robert McMichael, had assaulted her. She made plans to go to her best friend's house, but she never arrived. Ashley was never seen alive after that day. In July, Howley's mother filed a missing persons report. This was the time when the authorities found Howley's vehicle abandoned in a parking lot. The authorities suspected McMichael had something to do with Howley's disappearance, but they had no evidence to go on, and the case eventually went cold. On TV, a gut feeling is enough to drag somebody in and question them. In real life, it takes a lot of legwork, and the higher ups have to become convinced that a suspect needs to be brought in. The police don't just drag folks in because they think they had something to do with it. Now, I do understand that in other countries, things are different. Some places, the authorities can question a suspect and hold them for 72 hours just on suspicion. Here in the U.S., citizens, even the guilty ones, have a lot of rights. Christy Robinette is a psychic medium who says that she can talk with the dead. One night, a year after Howley's disappearance, Robinette was fast asleep when she was awoken by the ghost of a woman who said her name was Ashley and she had been killed by her boyfriend. Robinette said that this woman, this ghost, wanted revenge. Robinette had no knowledge of Ashley Howley's disappearance, so she searched the internet and was able to find her missing persons report. She immediately knew that Howley was the ghost who had communicated with her. She went to the authorities to tell her story. Investigators, after hearing from Robinette, decided that perhaps she knew something. She was not a suspect, but she was able to describe how Robinette was dressed when she disappeared. How Howley was dressed when she disappeared. She was given contact to the family to possibly help out. Robinette and Howley's family traveled to a location that Howley described. The psychic knew that they found the site where Howley's remains would be found, but authorities were unable to investigate any further because it was on private property. They couldn't get a warrant for a search just based on a psychic's story. 2008, Robert McMichael was charged with the murder of his mother and her boyfriend. The two were found dead inside their home December 2007. During the course of that investigation, authorities began to suspect that McMichael had something to do with Howley's disappearance as well, and this gave them probable cause to go to a judge and get a warrant to dig up that property. Once they found Howley's remains, her body was found in the exact location where Robinette had said it would be found. McMichael was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Robinette has worked on other investigations since the Howley case. She said her participation is confidential, and there are some people who don't agree with using psychics to investigate cases. She's willing to use her abilities if it means helping the victims and their families. She does investigative work without charging for it. And she's been doing this since 2000. Desperate for answers, the mother sought out Carol Pate's psychic assistance to help find her missing 17-year-old son, Tyson. Tyson went missing from his job at a local grocery store in Malvern, Arkansas, November 14, 1991. After a huge manhunt with no leads, Tyson's mother went to Pate with her son's photograph, hoping that somehow this could help. As she touched the photograph, Pate felt a strong connection to the boy that caused a startling vision of him being abused. She was able to see the captors, but not well, but she was able to tell the parents that he was alive, and somehow the word ridge was involved. Pate was able to leave. Pate was able to lead police to within a half a mile of where Tyson was being held prisoner in a house on Ridge Road. After 6 days of being held captive, Tyson convinced his kidnappers to let him go. When he was reunited with his family and told of Pate's vivid vision of him, he was astonished at how spot on they were. She knew details that only him and his kidnappers knew. 2 men were arrested, tried, and given 3 consecutive life sentences in the kidnapping of Tyson. Alexis Burke, a 28-year-old mother living in Lake Oswego, Oregon, was reported missing by her husband, John Burke, 3 days after she vanished. The officer taking the report thought Mr. Burke's reactions weren't quite what you would expect from a man whose wife was missing. Months later, with Alexis still missing and no leads, the family contacted psychic Lori McQuarrie, who gave some interesting information. According to McQuarrie, the Burke marriage was troubled, plagued by arguments and finances. John wasn't too keen on having a job or working to help pay the bills. McQuarrie said that during one of these arguments, John wound up strangling Alexis, and then he got his brother to help hide the body. McQuarrie outlined 30 different points about the murder and the burial of Alexis Burke to Detective Bob Lee. 29 of these points were correct. Alexis's body was recovered, buried 75 yards from where John worked. John was convicted and sentenced to 13 years in Oregon State Penitentiary. His brother was identified as his accomplice, but he gave state's evidence, so he wasn't locked up. In 1987, Elizabeth Cornish was found by her boyfriend murdered in her apartment. DNA testing wasn't that good back then, and so it didn't help the investigation at all. One neighbor who the police suspected might have been involved was given a lie detector, but he passed it. In a last effort, Cornish's sister contacted psychic Nancy Weber for help. After meeting with the sister and visiting the scene of the crime, Weber was able to give police some startling clues that would help resolve the case. She told detectives that the neighbor upstairs, a man with a Western belt buckle and a scar on his face, was the one who attacked Cornish. She also noted that the believed time of the murder was wrong, a fact that was later confirmed by the autopsy. This was why the guy had passed the lie detector. They had asked him, "Were you somewhere at such and such a time?" And he'd said, "No, I was at home," which was true. The time of the murder was wrong. With the new information, police brought the upstairs neighbor in. and they re-questioned him. And because of the new facts that they had, the man wound up giving a full confession and was sentenced to life in prison for the murder. There's more than one kind of second sight. Some folks can see what's going to happen, while others see what's happened in the past. Telepathy is the ability to read another person's thoughts. It is possible to tell what someone is thinking, but you don't get any details. You won't hear them thinking about something, but you can figure out if they're thinking something good or bad. Some people can send and receive thoughts naturally. The Akashic records are a compendium of all universal events, thoughts, words, emotions, and intent ever to have occurred in the past, present, or future in terms of all entities and life forms, not just humans. They're believed by theosophists to be encoded in the non physical plane of existence that is known as the mental plane. The Sanskrit term Akasha was introduced to the language of theosophy through H. P. Blavatsky, who characterized it as a sort of life force. She also referred to indestructible tablets of astral light, records both the past and the future of human thoughts and actions. She didn't call it Akashic at the time. The noted uh, author Alfred Pierce Sinnett, in his book Esoteric Buddhism, uh, quoted Henry Steele Olcott's A Buddhist's Catechism. Olcott wrote that Buddha taught two things are eternal: Akasha and Nirvana. Everything has to come out of Akasha in obedience to the laws of motion inherent in it and passes away. No thing ever comes out of nothing, like the Big Bang. The Akashic record is like an immense photographic film. When this was written, they didn't have computers yet, registering all the desires and earth experiences of our planet. Those who receive it will see pictures therein. The life experience of every human being since time began, the reactions to experiences, and the entire animal kingdom, the aggregation of the thought forms of a karmic nature of every human unit throughout time. Only a trained occultist can distinguish between actual experiences and those astral pictures created by imagination and keen desire. Edgar Cayce, one of the three most interesting people to ever walk this earth, was an American clairvoyant who was able to channel his higher self while sleeping in a trance. His words were recorded by his friend Al Lynn, his wife Gertrude Evans, and later by his secretary Gladys Turner. During the sessions, Cayce would answer questions on a variety of subjects like healing, reincarnation, dreams, the afterlife, past lives, nutrition, Atlantis, and future events. Cayce was a devout Christian and a Sunday school teacher. He said his readings came from his subconscious mind exploring the dream realm where, according to him, all minds were timelessly connected. Cayce founded the nonprofit organization, the Association for Research and Enlightenment, to record and facilitate the study of channelings and to run a hospital. Cayce was known as the Sleeping Prophet. He said he was able to tie into the Akashic records. If every experience, thought, and deed of every one was out there somewhere waiting for us to hook into it, then we would know what other people are thinking. This would be a form of telepathy. People have now become telepathically communicating with each other. Monkeys have solved problems as a connective hive mind. Humans have been given telepathic controls of a rat. Not a politician, but a rat. Same thing. The brain transmits messages as electrical signals through nerves. We can read the electrical activity from brain cells with electronic devices, then transmit the signal and turn it back into brain cell activity at the other end. Implanted electrodes can sense the change in electrical currents as brain cell activity. An EEG rests a collection of larger electrodes on top of the head, where it records the electrical activity of larger groups of cells. The boys in the white lab coats are working on being able to read our minds. I'm sure the government won't look into using this as a means of controlling us. Next time you go to the airport and they have this thing they're going to put on top of your head, oh well, I don't fly anymore. A clairvoyance is the ability to see events or objects happening somewhere else. Remote viewers can do this. The government spent a ton of our money studying remote viewing, covering a span of many years, only to claim it didn't work. Why it took them so many years to convince themselves, more like they tried to convince us, there was nothing to see here. In an experiment conducted by the CIA, a subject was informed of the existence of a top secret Soviet military base at a place called Semipalatinsk. Okay, my listeners in Russia, I'm sorry I don't speak Russian, and this word has lots of letters in it. They're 25 to 30 miles southwest of the Irtysh River in Siberia. The remote viewer was able to see many of the details asked about. Ah, correction, he was unable to see most of the details he was being asked about. But then he drew something that he was able to see. He said he could see a mobile gantry crane built on a huge scale. Its wheels were taller than a man. He said the crane was 150 feet tall and it sat on rails that were 50 feet apart. He also said this crane ran on tracks over an underground building and it made a number of detailed sketches, almost with engineering quality. The evaluating officer said the remote viewer supplied the most positive evidence yet for remote viewing with his sketch of the rail-mounted gantry crane. Even with such a detailed drawing, the evaluating officer then said that the remote viewing experiment of Semipalatinsk proved to be unsuccessful. The experiment was actually very successful, according to Dr. Russell Targ. He said that this trial was such a stunning success that we were forced to undergo a formal congressional investigation to determine if there had been a breach in national security. Of course, none was ever found, and we were supported by the government for another 15 years. A young airman named Rosemary Smith was assigned to Project Stargate at Fort Meade, Maryland. She was given a map of Africa and told that sometime in the past a Soviet Tu-22 bomber that was outfitted as a spy plane had crashed somewhere on the continent. U.S. intelligence services wanted to recover this top secret Russian codes and the equipment from the T-22. The plane went down somewhere in Central Africa. Despite orienting multiple satellites to locate the plane, the DoD kept coming up short. Using her remote viewing, the psychic pinpointed the wreckage, even though it was completely covered by the jungle canopy. A special operations team was rushed to the spot, and they found the plane and all its secrets. A real coup for the intelligence folks. Not surprisingly, the military tried to downplay the event. They said that this was just a fluke. It was a one-of-a-kind deal. The Stargate project was a secret U.S. Army unit established in 1978 Fort Meade, Maryland by the Defense Intelligence Agency. The Stargate project was terminated and declassified in 1995 after a CIA report concluded that it was never useful in any intelligence operation. It only ran for 17 years and cost $20 million. It took 17 years to determine remote viewing didn't work. I think they just don't want us to know it works, and a lot of folks would begin remote viewing to see what those folks are really doing with our tax dollars. According to those people, no remote viewing report ever provided actionable information of any intelligence operation. Overall, the project never gave the CIA any real meaningful information, but it was still funded until 1995, when the American public found out about the project from an episode of ABC's news magazine Nightline. Now, do you really think it didn't work, or do you think they just don't want us to know that it really worked? And what are they doing with it today? Precognition is the ability to see the future. This would come in handy when buying lottery tickets. It would also be good if you're about to board a plane that is destined to crash. In Clovis, New Mexico, 2003, a 16-year-old girl was having bad nightmares. She had reoccurring nightmare about a man who was doing horrible things to children. She'd never seen the man before, but she could describe him perfectly. He had long, stringy hair. He was skinny. He was in his late 30s or early 40s. He was dirty and unkempt. The dream had shook her up so much that she talked about it in great detail. One day, months later, she was riding with her father en route to pick up her brother. The father stopped the vehicle and they waited for the young boy. As he came walking out the door, a man appeared from the house several doors down. The young girl saw him and freaked out. She began to cry, saying that it was the man from her nightmares. He looked exactly like the man she had seen doing bad things. As soon as her brother was in the back seat, she begged her father to get the heck out of there fast. No one knew who this guy was. He just moved into the neighborhood. The father was so worried about what his daughter had said, he called his son's friend and talked to his parents. They had no idea who this stranger was. Nobody in the neighborhood knew him. Days later, there was a news report involving a child sex ring. The authorities had busted the ringleader, and there was a photograph of him. The image was the man that they had seen near the friend's house. Retrocognition is the ability to see into the distant past. Some folks say they can look back in time and see things that took place years ago. Bruce Whittier had reoccurring dreams of being a Jewish man hiding in a house with his family. At the time, his name had been Stefan Horowitz, a Dutch Jew who was discovered in his hiding place along with his family and taken to Auschwitz, where he died. During and after the dreams, Bruce felt panicky and restless. He began to record his dreams, and one night he dreamed about a clock. The clock was of immense importance to the folks hiding in the attic because they were over a shop that was often visited by Nazi soldiers. The hidden people had to remain quiet during the hours the shop was open. Once he woke, he was able to draw the clock in great detail. Days later, Whittier dreamed about the location of this clock in an antique shop, and he went to have a look. The clock was visible in the shop window, and it looked exactly like what he had dreamed. Whittier asked the dealer where it had come from. It turned out that the dealer had bought this clock from a bunch of property from a retired German major from the Netherlands. The major never said where he had gotten the clock. The price on the clock was way too much for Whittier. When the local synagogue learned about the dreams and the clock, they bought it and they gave it to Whittier. Mediumship is the ability to channel dead spirits. I have met a few people that could do this. Some of them also do what is called automatic writing. They hold a pen or a pencil in their hand and they allow the spirit to move the hand, creating words on paper. I don't have any stories on mediums. There are thousands out there. I will say if a bunch of mediums are paying for commercials on TV, they're probably not real mediums. Miss Cleo comes to mind. Not only was she not a medium, she wasn't from Jamaica. Her accent was as fake as her mediumship. She was from Los Angeles. Psychometry is the ability to read information about a person or a place by touching a physical object. Kind of like how a bloodhound can follow a trail by scent, the psychometer, I don't know if that's a real word or not, but I just made that one up, can pick up things about a person from objects or photos. A friend of mine named Jim found a ring while walking along a road. He had been the chief of police at one time. It was not what he wanted to do for a living. There were too many crooks in public office. He held the ring in his hand for a few minutes and then put it in his pocket. There was no way to tell who it had belonged to, but he felt drawn to it. Weeks later, he was going to attend a party. For no known reason, he put the ring in his pocket. Once he and his wife arrived, they did all the things you do at social events. He noticed a woman across the room. Once again, he felt drawn to her. Jim walked over to the woman and then handed her the ring, saying, "I believe this belongs to you." She was overjoyed. The ring was an heirloom, having been in her family for years. She discovered it was missing, but she had no idea when or where it had wound up. Jim told her he found it on the ring, on the road. He found it on the road, but she had never been to that part of town. Just by touching it, Jim was able to locate the owner of the ring. Telekinesis is the ability to alter the physical world with mind power. It usually takes place on the same list, it usually is placed on the same list, but involves moving objects with the mind and not seeing or hearing events. One reported case of telekinesis happened to a French girl named Angelique Cotton when she was 14 years old. On the evening January 15th, 1846, she and three village girls were doing some embroidery. Suddenly, the embroidery jumped out of everybody's hand, and a lamp was thrown into the corner. The girls accused Angelique because in her presence, strange things always seemed to happen. Furniture would move on its own, and other things would move about the building when nobody was there to move them. Angelique's parents organized a show in Mortagne in order to earn some money using their daughter's abilities. The girl caught the attention of a Parisian scientist, Franco Arago. When the girl was in her electrified condition, almost anything that made contact with her would fly away. When Arago tried to touch the girl, he experienced a shock, much like touching a source of electrical current. Angelique was anywhere near a magnet. Without her even knowing it, she would shake from head to foot. A compass didn't react to her presence. Most of the items that did move were either made out of wood or ceramic. Nina Kulagina. Nina Kulagina, I hope that's how it's pronounced, was one of the most mysterious and famous people who seemed to have telekinetic abilities. She lived in Russia during the Soviet era and exhibited a number of very unusual abilities, studied by more than 40 scientists for nearly 20 years, and most of the experiments were filmed. No one has ever been able to find a scientific explanation for the phenomenal abilities of this woman. She said she was able to move small objects with the power of thought alone, or change the trajectory of their movement without touching them. She was also said to have the ability to emit ultrasonic waves. Till now, the nature of these powers and how they develop remains a mystery. All of these abilities are based on the idea that human beings can perceive things beyond the scope of known bodily senses. The concept has been around since the beginning of human civilization under many different names, but the modern concept didn't develop until the 20th century. The term ESP itself was coined in 1934. Duke University professor Rhine, one of the first scientists to conduct paranormal research in a university setting. ESP believers around the world have different ideas of how these abilities manifest themselves. Some people believe everybody possesses these abilities, and we involuntarily experience moments of ESP all the time. Others say only a handful of psychics, shaman, or mediums have this special power, and that they can only access this power when they put themselves into a special mental state. Believers also disagree on how ESP actually works. One theory says that, like our ordinary senses, ESP is energy moving from one point to another. Typically, proponents of this theory say ESP energy takes the form of electromagnetic waves, kind of like radio and X ray energy, that we haven't been able to detect scientifically. The entire physical universe is made up of pure energy and vibration. When you have the insight to see everything as a vibration, the nature of the universe is revealed to you. Light is vibration. The entire electromagnetic wave spectrum of visible light produces different colors. Colors are simply waves vibrating at different frequencies. On one end of the spectrum, you have red. On the other is violet. Red has the longest wavelength and the lowest frequency. Violet has the shortest wavelength and the highest frequency. There are two kinds of electrical lighting that you can find when you go to the store. There's warm light and cool light. Warm light contains a greater mixture of lower frequency color waves, such as yellow and orange. Cool light contains a greater mixture of higher frequency color waves, such as green and blue. Light is crucial in its environmental effects upon work, play, rest, and other life activities. It controls stimulation, relaxation, and energy level. Since warm light is more relaxing than cool light, you might think that you can use it to help you physically by turning the lights up or down. Some people think that warm light in a room will make the place more relaxing, and by turning on a whole lot of warm lights, they'll be more relaxed. It doesn't work that way. Increasing the light's intensity of warm light does not make it more stimulating. Higher energy levels require higher rates of vibration. It is not the magnitude, but the frequency of the vibration that determines its energy level. Health is vibration. Cold, damp, dark places with a lack of airflow are breeding grounds for bacteria, whereas sunny places with abundant airflow eliminate unhealthy microorganisms. The second type of environment is healthier than the first because it is a higher vibration, while the other is a lower vibration. We can't see some light that is all around us. Ultraviolet and infrared are both colors we can't see with the naked eye. I just have to say this. A bit of the old ultraviolence. Yes, I saw Clockwork Orange shortly after its first release in the theaters. I was probably too young, but the young lady selling the tickets didn't seem to mind, and oh well, Alex was not a good role model. There are some animals that can see in these color spectrums. I wonder if maybe some folks can. Maybe not see, but perceive colors, things, information the rest of us are unaware of. Psychic energy is a certain frequency. Like a radio, we have to be tuned in on that frequency in order to hear or see it. How do we tune ourselves? One way is meditation. Tibetan monks use all kinds of sounds while meditating: bells, chants, singing bowls, all tuned to certain frequencies. The modern orchestral standard is 440 hertz, where hertz is a unit of measure per second. 440 hertz would translate to 440 vibrations per second. Some people will tell you a singing bowl has to be 440 hertz. Others say it can go as high as 528. Now, I'm no expert at this, but my bowl is 432 hertz, and it seems to work out just fine for me. The monks chant at 432 hertz. Since the universe is made up of vibration, using vibration to help heal your body makes sense. It makes a lot more sense than using a bunch of chemicals that are eventually going to lead to your downfall. Big pharma, can you really trust those folks? Whereas a vibration, well, that's nature. If you want to hear more about Hertz for healing, that's with a Z and not an S, I might do a show soon. If not, you can look into it for yourself. There's a whole conspiracy about how the government is regulating sound, requiring people only use the hertz that they want us to use. There'll probably be more on that later. I hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends, tell your relatives, tell total strangers they should be listening to Strange Things with Chris James. Remember, Christmas is coming soon, and books make good Christmas presents. They don't need batteries. They're easy to wrap. If you drop them, they don't break. And if the recipient decides they don't like it, they can always rewrap it and give it to somebody else. And if you like listening to stories, tune in to Story Time with Chris James. It's another channel on YouTube, and I'm also putting it out on iHeartRadio. Till next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?